I'm Pearl Whitfield, and I am going to be doing a series of readings from my new book, The Storekeeper, A Tale of Small Town Life, which is available on Amazon, starting with Chapter 1. I'll be doing it in little pieces of Chapter 1. Chapter 1. Ralph Johnson felt a rush of excitement as he pulled up the blind on the door and flipped over the sign. Open. His first day as a storekeeper in Campbell. He took a big breath, unlocked the door, and was ready for business. After Ruth died, he couldn't stay in Ridgeway anymore. The big old house was too much. There were too many reminders of all their wonderful years together and the terrible final months. It had been a relief when she finally stopped fighting and let go, all her pain sticking to him as he closed her eyes and kissed her goodbye. He'd loaded the truck and took off, Rusty riding shotgun. They drove all over the country, all the little roads and one-street towns. He didn't even know what he was looking for until he drove into Campbell. Something about the awnings on faded brick buildings was familiar. Or was it the Victorian courthouse? Or the tiny white library building on Main Street? He parked and strolled around, letting Rusty sniff at the big old trees lining both sides of the streets around the town square. His shoulders eased. He didn't realize how tightly he'd been holding. Rusty led him just out of town to the cemetery. Ralph sat with his back against an ancient Lombardy poplar and closed his eyes. Tears welled up, and he didn't try to stop them. It was time to stop running, time to stop hiding from the rest of his life. After a late lunch at the dinner bell, Ralph strolled through town again. He noticed the for sale sign standing at a crazy angle in the front window of L&B's Market. The wide front porch leaned a bit and the building needed to be scraped and painted, but the roofline was straight. He crossed the street and climbed the steps, which were solid, as was the handrail. There was a wheelchair ramp off to one side from a small, graveled parking lot, but grass was growing up through the gravel all the way to the ramp. A cowbell danged when he opened the door. He looked around. No one was there. The bulbs in the high ceiling cast a dim light, but he could see well enough thanks to the big display windows in front. Wide old floorboards dated from when trees were trees. They had been polished by years of boots, mostly walking down the middle. 5 aisles of shelves were sparsely stocked, but clean. He sniffed and smiled. The slightly dusty smell was comforting, and he caught a tang of pickle. Sure enough, there was the pickle barrel with a slotted spoon on a string hanging from the hinged lid. He heard a rustle and looked around, then down. The tiniest woman he had ever seen looked back at him from behind a long wooden counter that ran along the left side of the store. She was taller than the counter, but barely by a head. That head was sparsely covered with crinkled white hair, and her cheeks were like parchment. The eyes regarding him were faded blue, but the gaze direct. Somehow, he felt her looking into him. "Can I help you?" Her voice was stronger than she looked. Yes, I saw the sign out front, the for sale sign," Ralph stammered. She waited for him to continue. "Well, can you tell me?" Ralph faltered. "Tell me what?" he wondered. "Tell me where I am? Why I suddenly want to stand behind that counter, to spend my days in this building full of someone else's memories?" "I wondered..." Ralph gave up. "How much?" "My name is Loretta," the woman said. "L&B Loretta. Would you like some tea or coffee? I'm afraid the coffee is left from this morning." "Tea would be wonderful." The woman smiled a small smile and led him toward the back of the store. There was a metal table with an oilcloth cover that might once have had a floral design, on which were ranged several pump carafes for coffee and pour carafes for milk and half. Next to the sugar was an old coffee can with no lid. On it was taped a wrinkled paper, "Coffee, 75 cents." Taking down 2 mugs from the selection hanging on hooks above the table, Loretta pumped hot water into them. She handed one to Ralph. He picked a black tea bag from the wicker basket and 2 packets of sugar. Several chairs lounged around a wood stove that had not been lit for some time. Ralph chose a ladder back with a firm woven seat, easier to get up from, and the woman perched in a rocker. As they sipped, Loretta told him about the store. The building had been built in 1888, one of the first in Campbell, and it had always been a store. It survived the fire in 1910 that wiped out most of the town. She had been born in Campbell and met Bud at rodeo the summer after high school. They moved to California to see the world. But that was just before World War II. Bud went to the South Pacific, and she built airplanes. She smiled. "Rosie the Riveter, you know." After the war, they both just wanted a quiet life, so they moved back to Campbell. Bud worked on ranches, and she helped old man Jervis with the store. Then the old man had up and died. To their surprise, he left the store to them. "That's about it. We worked here together for 54 years. After Bud died, I put the place up for sale. That was 6 years ago. Not many nibbles in Campbell. But I'm going to move on over past Monroe. Our youngest daughter has a little house out on their ranch, and they want me to come. I've had a good run here, but it's time to retire. What about you, Mr. Johnson? Ralph Johnson, but please, just Ralph. I'm not sure I can explain it. I don't rightly know myself." Then he told her about Ruth and her dying and his driving around for months with the dog, and about how he felt when he stopped in Campbell that morning. "I just want to settle down and get on with my life," he ended lamely. Loretta gave him one of her looks and nodded. They talked all afternoon between customers. Loretta introduced him. "Ralph Johnson here is looking to buy the market," she'd say. The women smiled and the men shook hands. As the golden evening light poured through the display windows, Ralph felt peace flow in with it. Whatever was here, it was the right thing for him.